weeks out from the Berlin Marathon. I'm back in Flagstaff. This is the final part to my Build to Berlin series, so I'll tell you how the race went, a few things I learned from it, and how I ran a personal best. Let's get into it. Seen any other videos in this series, you'll know I've been building to this marathon for about 10 to 12 weeks. I had a goal of running about 2:27 as an A goal, and my B goal was to break 2 hours and 30 minutes. And then as a C goal, kind of last resort, if everything goes wrong, I just wanted to finish the race. In Boston in 2023, I had some catastrophic problems that led me to lack a lot of confidence going into my next marathon. So I had a lot of nervousness about this marathon, how my stomach would hold up, how my training would hold up. But I ended up running the most mileage I've ever run in my life. I peaked at about 87 miles, which for me is significantly more than I've ever run. I built up for about like 10 solid weeks of marathon training. But prior to that, I was doing a bunch of strength and speed work and trying to set myself up for success in the marathon build. So overall, it's been since like April, May timeframe of just trying to get fit, building up for a fall marathon. And my goal was to just be competent as I could in the marathon, run a strong race and run my own race and not get caught up in what everyone else is doing and finish feeling good about my time, which I ended up achieving that goal of just feeling really good about the marathon, having a strong race. I ended up running a negative split, and overall, I'm very satisfied with it, but I think there are a few key things that I would take away from it and apply to my next marathon build, and I'll get into what those are in a second. So overall, the Berlin Marathon was pretty intense. There's about 58,000 people running, which is a massive, massive race. For me, it's pretty overwhelming. I'm not used to these big races. This is my second world major. I did Boston, which was pretty intense, very well run. Berlin was a little bit more chaotic, and there were a lot more people running. That was an interesting experience getting through that. In order to arrive with enough time to acclimate to the time change and get my legs under me after the flight, get loose before the race, I wanted to give myself a significant amount of time pre-race. So I ended up arriving in Germany about 5 days in advance. We got in late, stayed the night at a hotel at the airport, and then the next morning went over to Potsdam, which is a town outside of Berlin. A beautiful, like, historic town, awesome running. We stayed by this park where there were a bunch of soft surfaces for me to run on, which is great for my taper. Got an Airbnb, so I was cooking for myself and my wife. I was able to avoid a bunch of the just dependency on going out and getting whatever food is available, which can be tough when you're traveling and if you have kind of a sensitive stomach like I do. That was awesome. We stayed in Potsdam for about 3 days, and I did a really light workout in Potsdam. Beautiful scenery. This park, I forget what the park was called. I'll put the park up on the screen. It was absolutely gorgeous. Perfect place for running, perfect place for relaxing for 3 days. And we were able to take a bunch of naps, acclimate to the time change, and then jump over to Berlin a few days later. So we spent 3 days in Potsdam, ended up doing about 4 days in Berlin. We arrived in Berlin the day we went to the expo. We went to the expo on Friday, which I was assuming that it would be less crowded than Saturday, but more crowded than Thursday. That might have been the case, but it was insanely crowded. The line to get in took us like 45 minutes of just waiting outside in a sea of people, thousands of people. Once you get in, they corral you into these little like cattle corrals where you're going through all these lines. I ended up making a mistake. I didn't order the jacket online like I thought I did, so I didn't double check that, and I ended up having to purchase the jacket in the store, which was another 2-hour line, which was just bananas. The whole time I was pretty frustrated, tired, wanted to get off my legs and get back to our Airbnb. But ultimately got through it. We took these Lime scooters around everywhere, which is great for not having to walk and take public transit. And then I just kind of chilled till the race. Because I had this kind of hip issue going on, it was my hip flexor that was bothering me. It wouldn't bother me all the time, but it mostly was on, like when I was doing strides or some faster running, it would start to pull and it just got tight on me. So I was working through that and doing all my PT and my stretching and my rehab the whole time we were on the trip, kind of freaking out because I thought it was going to bother me during the race. Luckily, the tub at our Airbnb in Berlin was clean, and I ended up just like using some bleach on it, cleaning it, and hopping in the tub for a hot bath the night before, and then also the morning of the race just to loosen up. I'd do that, and I'd stretch out and get my legs moving and just kind of like work all those problem areas. It ended up being great because my hip problem didn't bother me during the race, but I'll get into that in a sec. So the day of the race, I woke up at like 4:30, didn't leave the house until like 7 o'clock-ish, 7:10. And so I had some time. I hopped in a hot bath, ended up stretching out a little bit. I ate 2 Morton solid 160 bars, which I was debating between like a normal breakfast or the Morton 160s. And I knew I wanted to get about 80 carbs in, and I want to do that about 2 to 3 hours before the race. So that can be kind of hard to measure with normal food, and I also wasn't sure about like how much fiber was in the bread we bought there, and I've had stomach issues in the past, so I said, you know what, I haven't experimented with this food before, but in training I've fueled with Morton solids before runs like tons of times. So all I did was up it from 1 bar when I'm like rushing during training, and I'll just eat a bar like an hour before a long run. I did 2 bars as like a full breakfast before the race, and that ended up being like a really, really good idea. So I got to the start line feeling full enough to run the race, but also I had a bottle in my hand of a Morton 160 with a little bit of extra salt, and I was able to hit that bottle right when we started and fuel up with a bottle before like 7K. So that whole like pre-race plan ended up working out super well, which I was worried about. The weather was kind of chilly in the morning. It felt like it was like high 30s, which is single digits in Celsius. It's like 4 degrees, 3 degrees Celsius. That's how it felt. I don't know exactly what the temperature was, but there was some wind and it was pretty frigid. And before the sun came up, once the sun came up, it felt great, but we were warming up and it was pretty chilly during the warm up. I tried to get into the A corral as soon as I could. So it was like 20 minutes, 15 minutes before the race started. Ended up getting into the A corral. It was super crowded. I kind of got stuck behind this barrier, which was sketch because there's like 50,000 people behind you pushing you against this barrier. But luckily, once the gun went off, I was able to like squeeze through and get out of that danger zone pretty quick. I started with a buddy, Jay, who was from Santa Cruz. We had raced together several years ago in Santa Cruz, and he ended up running Berlin. We connected on Strava, and he was aiming for a similar time goal. So we started together, and I started pretty conservative. So I was kind of right behind him, but then he wanted to take off a little bit quicker, and I decided to just hold back and keep running like 540-ish, like high 530s. And that ended up being a smart move because I negative split. I ended up running the first half in I think 74:25, and then the second half was like 74 and teens. So just slightly faster on the second half. So I started honestly, the beginning was kind of tough because there were so many people, and I started around like 5:45 per mile ish. And it just felt slow. It was kind of like weaving around people, trying to find a good spot. And it can be really tough with this many people, especially at the start of a race, to like find a groove. So I think that did cost me a little bit in the end because it's a lot of mental energy. It's a lot of like trying to figure out what your plan is and find a good line and find a good group to run with. But once you're able to settle in, it's pretty easy to stick with a pack as long as that pack is running a consistent pace. And lucky for me, there were a lot of elite women who are running in that like 230 down to like 225 range. So I tried to stick with as many of those groups as I could for the first half of the race. And then in the middle, I ended up feeling really, really good. I remember like hitting halfway and I was just thinking, man, I could run like 10 seconds per mile faster, but I held back a little bit and I just sped up slightly, like just a few seconds per kilometer. Felt really, really good. And I think that translated into that faster second half because my fastest 5K was between 30K and 35K. And then once I hit 35K, things ended up getting really tough. So from the beginning of the race until that halfway mark, I mean, the crowds were super intense. Berlin surprised the hell out of me with having so many people out on the course. It was amazing. It was almost better than Boston because in terms of crowds, because Boston has these periods where it's like no man's land, where there's just homes and like bushes and there's nowhere for people to be on the road. And you don't get these huge crowds until you get like into Boston proper. But in Berlin, the whole race was through the entire city. So there were people everywhere. And it was like several people thick through the entire race. It really was surprising. So it was really easy to like feed into that energy and just let it push you through the first half of the race and through like 25K. And like I said, I felt really, really good up to like 30K, 35K. And my fueling was on point. I was just luckily they had Morton on the course. I had several gels in my pockets. I used the big gels that are 40 grams of carbs instead of the 25 gram. And then once I got to that like 35K mark, things started getting really hard. My legs just kind of like, I just felt like I lost all my momentum and the strength in my legs. So I can attribute that to a few things, and I'll talk about that at the end. But it's obviously just goes back to like, what did you do in training? What did I miss? What were the things that came up that prevented me from being prepared enough to feel good at 35K, 40K, and ultimately through the end of the race? So when that happened, I kind of just started struggling, and I had my mantra for this race was pain is temporary, quitting is forever. And it's from David Goggins' videos that I was watching the night before and the morning of. It's just so true. I just knew that if I had quit or if I slowed down or if I just like gave in to the pain at all, that I would be so upset with myself because the race had gone so well and I felt like I was so prepared. So I ended up holding on and keeping up I think like a 540 pace. It was overall on my watch, my pacing, my splits were great on my watch. My watch was pretty far behind the course because of how many people and how much like bobbing and weaving I had to do through the crowds. And then also the tangents were like kind of hard to hit with that many people. So I ended up running significantly more than a marathon. But I was going off my watch pacing. So on my watch pacing, I was aiming for 227. I hit 227 and like 227 low on my watch GPS. But because of the tangents, because of the crowds, I ended up running 228.46. So that was kind of frustrating, realizing like when I got to like 30K that I was so far behind that I would have trouble catching up because I'd have to run like 225 pace to catch up to make the difference. But I just kept telling myself I wasn't going to quit, just get through the pain. It ended up being the most painful marathon I've run, and it's probably easy to say that for every marathon because they all suck and they're all really hard. But I do feel like this was the most painful. At that like 35K mark, I ended up just like gritting through it. But ultimately, once I got to like 40K, 41K, I knew I was at the end, just started grinding, see the Brandenburg Gate. It was amazing. I ended up having this guy as I was running through the Brandenburg Gate. He was struggling so much more than me, and he's breathing and he's like kind of like audibly like letting out these like wheezing sounds and like struggling and and he's it made me feel really good about how I was feeling, to be honest. And we ended up going through the Brandenburg Gate together, and then I got like just hammered that last like 300 meters or whatever it is to the finish line. But my legs were totally dead. You can kind of tell from my form in the video that I was just struggling. I didn't see my wife, but she was able to get a video of me running through the Brandenburg Gate, which is amazing. And thanks, Berde. And yeah, and I finished just like legs totally destroyed, but aerobically I felt really, really good. So I know that a lot of the gaps that I had in training, I think I can attribute a lot of that pain to some of those things that happened later in the block. So some of the things that went well in my marathon block was I was able to keep my volume up. I was able to honestly not have too much of an injury issue. I kept my Achilles completely under control the whole time, and it's a slow healing injury. And so the guidance I got from my physio, Wes, was just to keep running through it and not running through pain, but rehabbing it, keep it feeling as good as possible, and keep my volume up and keep the intensity at a range where I'm not causing more pain or more damage to the Achilles. And so it ended up progressively feeling better over the course of the block, despite me running like more mileage than I ever have. And so I was kind of around like 80 miles or so for the like 80, low 80s for the first 4 weeks. And I had a period of like 3 weeks where I had to take a dip because I had some work travel. My Achilles was bothering me. I was figuring out what the plan was with the Achilles. And then I kind of got the green light to just keep going with my injury problems. And so rehab the Achilles, kind of took back off on some volume, peaked at 87 miles. And then toward the end, I had a bunch of work travel again. Before traveling to Berlin, I had 3 work trips. So it was every other week. So 1 week I'd travel for work most of the week. Then I'd be home for a week after that. And then I'd travel again most of the week for work. Then I'd be home. Then I'd travel again the entire week. I went to Minnesota right before leaving for Berlin. And the hip thing, just I couldn't shake it during that time because there was so much sitting. It wasn't ideal. I ended up having to taper slightly that 3rd week when I was in Minnesota, and the hip issue was bothering me a lot, so I wasn't able to do any real workouts during that time. So I only ran like 62 miles that week. That long run, I had to break it into 2 like 10.5 mile runs instead of getting like a 22 mile run in. Volume wise, strength wise, long run wise, I felt like I could have kept the intensity up, kept the volume up had I not had some of those issues, but life happens and that's the way it went. So I'm not upset about it, but for next, my next training block and the one after that, it's definitely something I'm going to remember, that feeling of how bad my legs felt and what I could have done to prevent it. So honestly, that's my biggest takeaway from this race, is that I could have done more to prevent injury and try and perhaps limit travel if I could, but work is work and we got to pay the bills. I've got a family to support. There's nothing I can do about that part. It's part of what I think most people like me deal with, and probably most people are watching this video of, you've got to balance the thing that's ultimately it's a hobby, and you've got to balance work, you've got to balance paying the bills, you've got to balance family time, and all of those things that go into making you a happy person. And ultimately, I was really happy and doing well my entire marathon block. I didn't get too tired. I had support from my family. I was hitting really hard workouts and things that I'd never thought I could do before, and it resulted in a big personal best, and I'm super happy and content with that. Now, if you're running Berlin next year or anytime in the future, there are a few things I'd recommend. One, definitely get there pretty early to acclimate to some of the time change, especially if you're coming from the Western Hemisphere. If you're in Europe, it's probably no big deal, but for me, Arizona to Berlin was 9 hours time difference, completely like wrecked my internal clock. So my biggest recommendation is arrive early, have like 4 or 5 days under your belt of some easy running, some strides, maybe a really quick pre-marathon workout, and just try and get a really good night's sleep before the race. And lucky for me, I was able to sleep. It was the best sleep that I've ever got before a marathon, and I really felt good the day of the race. So thank God that happened, and it's mostly due to things that I had under my control and that I was able to optimize. Second thing was the expo was a nightmare. Pre-order everything online if you can. I thought I did. I followed all those tips from people on YouTube, and I didn't double check something went wrong. I didn't do it. I messed up. And I ended up waiting for 2 hours on my feet instead of just walking through the expo and getting out of there and going back to chill. And then the third would be finding a really, really good spot in the corral, asking people around you, what pace are you running? What's your target? And try and find some zone where people are going to be running your pace or faster. And I would even just add a little bit of extra like buffer time where you're running with people who are slightly faster than you, so that in the worst case, you are not the person running faster than everyone in front of you. You want people to be passing you. You don't want to be trying to pass other people in a mass of like 10,000 people in your big block, in your big corral. But in terms of preparing for a marathon, I'm going to keep putting out content on what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Just for people like me who are probably managing a personal life, professional life, they're hobby joggers or whatever, or maybe you're, in my area where you're kind of like an intermediate zone where you have to dedicate a ton of time to getting better, but you have a really demanding life because you're obviously not close to being a professional. So there's a lot of things that I do to optimize my life and get to where I am and to try and progress further. And I feel like those are things that anyone can apply. So stick around. Thank you for watching. Appreciate everyone sticking through this entire Build to Berlin series. I'm going to do more, but my next race is CIM in I think it's about 2 months. And if you have any feedback or like anything you'd like to see, put in the comments. Thanks for watching. Happy running. See you next time.